Hi, my name is Vicki Ellis, and I am the Executive Director of Heritage Ranch Christian Children's Home. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about our view around parenting and how to create healthy family culture. So really, our core and primary belief is that choice is at the center of everything that we do. And we believe at the core that love equates with choice, and that when God created us, He created us with choice in mind. So I want to share a little bit today about our philosophy on how to create healthy family culture and how to raise kids. We believe that using love at the center of everything we do and focusing on teaching our kids to make healthy choices will create free and responsible kids who can learn how to manage freedom well and can also learn how to have responsibility as a core in their lives. The important part of that is that when we are focusing on creating family culture and raising kids, what we want to think about is that one day our kids are going to be adults. They're going to be functional adults in the world, and we want to raise kids that have the capacity to be faced with a series and a myriad of choices and make good choices and be able to manage their freedom and make choices that will lead to wise decision making and productive and responsible lives. So at Heritage Ranch, we really focus around understanding that God gave us free will, and He did that because He understood the value of a life and relationships that are rooted in the opportunity to make choices. So when God created the world, what He did is He set up a system in which He gave us a choice to choose Him or to not choose Him. And at the core, I believe that the reason God values choice so much is that He knows that every relationship that has value has to be a relationship that we freely choose, not one that we're forced into. We can thrive for a period of time in a relationship that is forced, if you want to call it that. Honestly, when we're born into the family we're born into, we don't get to choose our parents. And so if you want to call that a forced relationship, it is a relationship where we did not get to decide what family we were born into. We're going to be in schools where we have teachers that we didn't get to choose, or we have bosses that we didn't get to choose. But at the end of the day, those are relationships that if we want them to thrive, we have to choose to cultivate them. We have to choose to give that person a place in our life. Well, with our relationship with God, if we choose Him, what I think He understood at the core was if He wanted a relationship with us that was going to have long-term value, He needed to create an environment in which we would decide that we wanted to be in relationship with Him. And so He said, hey, I'm creating you, I love everything about you. And He set up a world where He gave us parameters on what He knew would make us the most healthy. He told us what He felt like were good kind of rules to follow and unwise things to do. But at the end of the day, He created a world where we get to choose. We can choose to engage in a relationship with Him, and we can choose not to. We have free will. And so I believe that God created that model, and it's the best model, because what that means is, for myself, having chosen a relationship with God, I know that when I engage in relationship with Him, that I am not a victim to Him. I have chosen relationship with Him, and He loves me, and when I engage with Him, I can do so in a way that is healthy, and because I've made that decision. And so I would like to propose that it is really important as parents that we pursue our kids in the same way that God has pursued us. That yes, we are in their lives and we have a role of an authority figure, similar to how God does to us in the world. But what we want to create is we want to create a system in which we're meeting our kids where we are, and we're teaching them that we want them to follow the structure that we've created, and we want them to abide by the things that we're teaching them, not because they have to, but because it's going to be fruitful and lead them to a productive life. And saying that is a really tricky thing, because let me be honest with you, it can get pretty messy during the learning process, because when you give your children choice, what you have to understand is they're going to make poor choices along the way. From being 2, 3, 4 years old up to 14, 15, 16, when you create an environment in which you're telling your children, hey, I'm going to give you a voice in our family, and I'm not just going to come and say, hey, do everything exactly as I say, and you don't just focus on compliance and obedience, but rather You give a set of parameters for how you want your house to function and how you want your family culture to be, and you let them know that if they choose to not follow that structure and not follow those rules, that there will be consequences, but you still let them make choices. What you're creating is a kid who has to take responsibility for their decisions. I think one of the hardest things for parents today is trying to figure out how do they create healthy family structure. And I think that the real battle is between trying to create obedience and compliance or create choice and personal ownership and responsibility. And so at Heritage Ranch, we really believe that if you parent with the goal in mind of teaching your kids how to make wise and responsible decisions by allowing them the freedom of choice, then you create a healthier culture. So here's the thing. One of the things about requiring obedience, like, hey, to my child, if I say to do this, you do it. You do it no matter what. You do it because I said so, and you do it because I'm the parent and you're the child. Okay, the great thing is that there's a lot of safety in that, and there's a lot of control in that, because if I can tell my kid what to do and what I tell them to do is good, and then they do it, I can keep them safe. I can make sure that their trajectory is really great for their life long term. The issue with that is what happens when you're not around? Because when they're 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14 years old and you're there to guide everything that they do, that's great if they will listen to you and they learn everything. But one day they're no longer going to be in your house, and one day they're no longer going to have you there. And so the issue with just focusing on obedience-based, compliance-based parenting is what happens when there isn't someone there to guide everything that they do. They are going to have to think for themselves. And so here is the concern that I have. If you just use kind of obedience, compliance-based parenting, first of all, you're creating kids that don't know how to deal with failure a lot of the time. So what does that look like longer term? What it means is they're less likely to try something new. They're more likely to be afraid of risk and failure because they haven't learned how to make choices and fail well. So that is one of the risks of compliant-based parenting. Now, if you raise your kids in such a way that you engage with encouraging them to make healthy choices or to make choices at all, what they learn is they learn that all choices lead to some sort of consequence. So at the core, if I tell my child that they need to do their schoolwork, and that they have to study a certain amount every day. Okay, if they listen to me and they heed what I say, then they're going to study, they're going to do their schoolwork, they're going to find that doing that leads to usually better grades. But if I advise them that they need to study every day and they choose not to, well, what is going to happen? The natural consequence of not doing what I say is that they're likely to not get good grades and they're likely to fail. So one of the beauties of giving your kids choices is that they learn in life that there are natural consequences that they're going to have to deal with. And this serves them well later, because the reality is when they get a job, if they can't perform well and they don't do what they need to do, then they're going to have the natural consequence of potentially losing that job or so forth. So again, one of the things that I would encourage you about is that if you base everything in your parenting on compliant-based parenting and obedience, and you don't teach your kids how to choose and how to fail, then again, they're less likely long-term to be willing to try new things, and they're more likely to create patterns that aren't healthy long-term because they're afraid of failure, because they need someone in their life to always be guiding them. The next thing is that when you teach your kids just to do what you say and you don't teach them how to think about the consequences of their decisions, what you're actually creating on accident is you're creating kids that don't question adults. You're creating kids that don't necessarily set healthy boundaries. And here's the reality of it. I love kids being respectful. I think it is hugely important to create kids that are going to listen and are going to do the things that their parents say. I'm talking about the philosophy behind how you teach your kids to think. If you don't teach your kids to understand that there's a value for questioning what they're told, and you don't teach them to understand the importance of setting boundaries for themselves, they're not going to be able to assert themselves when they need to. So what you don't want is a daughter that listens to every adult in their life because they were told by their parent that you listen to what adults say, and then something bad is happening to that young lady through a teacher or a coach or someone in their life, and because they believe that they should never question an adult, they don't come and they don't get help. So it is really important that kids are taught that it is important to listen to authority figures and it is important to listen to their parents, but they also have to be taught that there is a value in questioning and understanding that they have a voice and that they should be able to set a boundary for themselves. The next thing that you have to worry about if you focus on compliance-based parenting is that it can also often lead to kind of a double life. So if your kid doesn't feel like they can question anything and they can share their real feelings with you because they feel like if they do anything bad or they struggle with anything that they're going to be in trouble, then they often have to hide what they're struggling with. They have to hide things from you. And so what you don't want is you don't want to accidentally create an environment where they feel like they have to be completely obedient, completely compliant, not have any struggles or issues, because then they are likely to keep things from you. And what you want to do is you want to be a voice in their life that can influence them, and you can do that by creating a safe environment for them to be able to talk to you about anything. And so that kind of leads to the final thing that I think is one of the biggest risks with compliance-based parenting, and that is that your kid may become isolated and lonely, and they also may focus more on performance than they focus on relationships. Because when you feel like you're in an environment where your parents expect you to listen to everything they say and you don't have the ability to fail and to choose and make choices that aren't healthy even sometimes, as you learn, you begin to often identify your value with your performance. And so you have a kid that feels like, hey, if I'm not making straight A's and I'm not doing well in everything that I'm doing and I'm not obeying everything, then perhaps I'm a failure. Perhaps at the core something's wrong with me. So that is what can happen if you focus on compliant-based parenting. Now, why do we value so much choice? And what is the impact of choice-based parenting and choice-based family culture? First things first is it creates ownership and accountability for kids. So when I tell my child that if they choose not to study, then they are going to have to lose electronics for a week. If they choose not to study and then they lose electronics for a week, afterwards they can't say that it was my fault that they lost electronics, because I told them beforehand, if you choose not to do this, then the outcome is that you're going to lose this privilege. And so they had the choice. They had the choice to either study and therefore have electronics and then also, I know, probably have better grades, or they can choose not to. But the reality is they're having to take ownership and accountability. One of the things about natural consequences that's really important is that when you give your kids choice, they start to understand that in the world, if you don't make good choices, then you usually don't have good outcomes, and they have to take ownership of that. So if your child chooses not to study and they're failing, then you let them make that decision. At some point as they're getting on the road to adulthood, they learn, if I don't take ownership and I'm not accountable for what I do, that's only on me. And if I want positive outcomes in life, then I have to make positive decisions, and I can't put the blame of that on my parents. It makes them independent, it makes them confident, and it makes them responsible. One other thing that's really important about creating choice is it creates kids that are resilient, and it creates kids that take personal responsibility for things, because they learn to make the choices that they need to make when you're not around. When you have given your kids responsibility over a period of time and allowed them the opportunity for choice, they start to trust themselves, and they start to understand that their choices have impact and have consequences, and that their choices matter. And so what does that look like? It means that you're creating kids that are advocates, that are empowered, and that understand that what they do and what they say matters. I used the example earlier of a young lady who maybe gets in a situation where somebody's pressuring her to do something that's not good. Well, if you've taught your child that they have a voice and that they have choices, and someone tells them to do something that they know doesn't feel right, then they're going to be empowered to come and say, no, that's not okay, or I need help, and they don't feel like they just have to be listening because the adult said so. The last thing that's really, really valuable in life is when you teach your kids that they are powerful and that they can be free and responsible to make choices. They learn that there's freedom in failure. They learn that failure is really just an opportunity for growth, and they realize a lesson that they need to learn. I don't care if they're 5 years old, they're 10 years old, they're 15 years old. It is going to apply for the rest of your life, which is this: every choice we make has a consequence, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent. Every choice we have will impact our life, and we're going to fail over and over again, because living is learning. And we need to teach our kids that failure should not be seen as bad. Failure should be seen as an opportunity to learn and to grow long term. And so at Heritage Ranch, again, we believe that love is choice. And if we want to raise free and responsible kids, and we want to have kids that become free and functional, responsible adults, that we need to focus on choice, not compliance.